join me for Ask the Good Doctor, live today and every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 12 noon Central Standard Time, and 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Bring your questions.
On my YouTube channel, on my YouTube channel. And please, if you could, subscribe to my YouTube channel. Yes. Ask the Good Doctor, LaJoyce Brookshire. Like, comment, and subscribe. Welcome to Ask the Good Doctor. I'm Dr. LaJoyce Brookshire. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm here to share wisdom about how to attain, maintain, and reclaim your perfect health. Thank you so much for being here. You are not going to want to miss 1 minute of this conversation today. I have got 3 amazing experts to help us unwind and untangle the mess that we're currently in America. And we are currently surviving 3 pandemics: coronavirus, of course, mental health, and racism. Yes, indeed, racism. So our 3 experts are here to have that conversation with us right now. We've got Dr. Shantella Sherman. She is one of the foremost leading experts on eugenics in this country, and one of my little mentees from long, long ago, who's just so awesome now. And she's also the author of In Search of Purity. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Shan.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Up next is Dr. Shea Butler, my new girlfriend, sister friend. I discovered her work on higher education platform, where she wrote a brilliant article on the what's what of racism, where she broke down some very rudimentary things that we all need to know. Welcome, Dr. Shea.
Great to be here again and see you, Dr. LaJoyce.
And you too. And Dr. Jonathan Matthias Lassiter is here with us. He's a PhD in psychology, and he is just awesome unto himself. So welcome, Dr. Jonathan.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, excited to have you. I just want to jump right in. First of all, America has unfolded in a way front and center in front of everyone, actually. In the midst of the pandemic, we didn't have anything else to do but sit in front of the television and watch horrible things happening. And I think it caused sort of a nationwide wake-up call. People took to the streets in every single nation, not just here, but around the world. People stood in solidarity with us. And it was the George Floyd brutal murder that unfolded it all. But I think even deeper, on a deeper level, Dr. Shan, and I want you to speak to this, that we have a problem of brewing amongst us in America, and probably it's worldwide. And your work in eugenics accurately depicts that. Can you explain, first of all, what eugenics is and a brief history of it?
Sure. Eugenics was basically a pseudoscience that formally came about roughly 1820, 1830, where a crazy guy named Francis Galton decided that if we could do what we do in agriculture and breed certain crop strains and pollinate them, then we can take out the characteristics that we don't want in certain crops and breed in the things that we do. He believed that we could do this with people as well. And so what you start to have is a belief of an American phenotype, all right? And the American phenotype is always white. It may be Protestant. It may be a certain height, a certain weight. But the belief is that anything that's outside of these parameters is something that's unpatriotic, is something that's criminal, is something that's genetically flawed. And so when we start talking about race laws and race purity and race mixing and segregation even, you start to understand that most of the policies in this country, the laws, were based upon this pseudoscience of eugenics. And so we can look at things, for instance, like the Dred Scott case, 1854. We can look at Plessy versus Ferguson. All of these, 1896, all of these have certain language barriers certain parameters that basically go right back to eugenics. And they talk about species, and they talk about the fact that these are a different strain. These are subhumans. This is a subspecies. And so part of my work actually documents legally how to determine who was fit, who was unfit, and then to actually go so far as early as 1907 and determine that anyone who's considered to be socially unfit could be sterilized by the government, state by state. 33 states in this country legally set up a platform where if you were considered socially unfit, you could be sterilized by the government because you weren't the proper type of an American and they didn't want you to reproduce.
How funny it is that we've been enduring this since the 1830s, and right now it's rearing its ugly head. Again, not exactly in these terms, but in other ways, with the implicit and explicit racism that we are enduring, the microaggressions that we are enduring in our nation today. We're right back there. Speak to that, Dr. Jonathan.
Yes. So microaggressions, those small everyday slights that have a big impact on us that we receive because of our race and other minority identities have a real effect. We are in a pandemic right now. Racism, as you said, racism, mental health, and COVID, all of them are interconnected. We know that racism negatively impacts so many different, not only mental health, but physical health outcomes. So racism is related to a particular type of stress, that minority stress that influences symptoms of PTSD, depression, anxiety, which also puts people at risk for things for anxiety and stress related health problems like hypertension and cardiovascular disease and diabetes and things like that. So all of these things are interconnected, and seeing these things on television every day, like you were talking about, is not helping. Even hearing about them and not witnessing them personally, the vicarious impact is real. It's been just viewing it vicariously has been linked to obesity and all types of other mental health problems as well. So it's a real problem.
It is a real problem. Dr. Shea, you have written this wonderful article, The What of Racism. And what I like so much about it is Dr. Joe Madison from SiriusXM always talks about putting it where the goats can get it, meaning really breaking it down. And you are in academia on the collegiate level, yet you found it necessary to define these words that we seemingly all should know, but we're finding out that people do not. Can you talk about some of those things that you wrote in that article that, wow, for me?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And thank you for that. Well, one of the things I found being in the academy is that sometimes we speak at a level where the goats can't get it. And sometimes we are at cross purposes when we're conducting diversity trainings, inclusion trainings, and those who are in the know, who live and do this work, who study this, who have devoted their lives to this, sometimes we speak at a level where those who are new to understanding, not new to understanding race and racism, it's a lived experience for those of us who are of color who go into these sessions, and it's witnessed by white individuals in America. But in terms of the importance of putting language around it so that we're all clear what we're talking about when we say words like diversity, inclusion, equity, equality, and where the differences are. And to the point that you've been making, that is so true about the effects of racism. More importantly now is this language and the comparative language between public health, because I really do believe that racism is a public health crisis. It needs to be addressed as such. I've done some work in the public health field and around HIV and AIDS, and there were two themes that we put our work into: prevention and treatment.
That's right.
And when we talk about things like diversity training, it's sort of meant to be a form of prevention. But then I like to get into the treatment aspect. And to me, that is the outcomes of training. So how are we addressing and finding solutions systemically? And because that's treatment. I'm all about hearts and minds. I think it's wonderful to try to formulate diversity trainings where we can change hearts and minds. That's some prevention work. But on the other side of that, we want outcomes. We want change.
That's right.
And change systemically, change within our community, public health, and certainly change systems change.
Yes, and we need it now because across the country, for the first time ever, local and state leaders are declaring racism a public health crisis and an emergency. And these declarations are so important in the first step in the movement to advance our racial equality and justice and must be followed by an allocation of resources and
Yeah.
strategic action. Now, I'm going to list for you the states and cities that are naming racism as a determination of health. And this is just quite interesting. Listen to this list: California, Colorado, Connecticut, Georgia, Illinois, Indiana, Massachusetts, Maryland, Michigan, Minnesota, Missouri, Nevada, North Carolina, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Texas, Vermont, Washington, and Wisconsin. And as I say, where are the rest of you?
Mm.
Where are the rest of you? Because racism has been linked to higher levels of death in Black men from suicide, disease, and homicide. And unfortunately, on average, Black youth face one major discriminatory experience each year. That is unacceptable. And as a result of racism and associated poverty and injustice, the expectancy at birth for Black men is far below that of Black men, Black women, white women, and white men. I have to throw up my hands because that makes me want to holler. All right. I cannot stand to even read that or to think of that. The high profile shootings of deaths of Black men in custody. And like you said, the repetition of repeatedly seeing this and going into our eye gates, it affects our health, our mind, bodies, and our spirits. Dr. John, you're a professor of psychology. What does that do to our psyche in terms of repeatedly seeing such injustice over and over and over?
Well, it literally activates our sympathetic nervous system. So the sympathetic nervous system is the part of our bodies that's responsible for the stress response. So even if we are not physically seeing that or experiencing the discrimination, witnessing it also activates the stress response. And once we see that over and over and over again, then the stress response becomes chronic and it can become dysregulated. It's hard to turn off. And what that means is that our bodies become impaired when fighting new threats like diseases and things like that. It literally attacks itself, and our tissue organs can start to break down. Where we are on hyper alert all the time. So it really does have a physical effect on our bodies.
It really does. And just what you said, affecting the sympathetic nervous system, it blows out the adrenals, our fight or flight response. And then we have adrenal fatigue. And do you know that adrenal fatigue is one of the most overlooked and underdiagnosed issues in people, all people, period. They just can't articulate, but they know it's something. But if they spent more time talking and less time writing prescriptions for what people say, they'll find that people are experiencing adrenal exhaustion. And what can we do, Doc Shan? What can we do to protect ourselves from what we already know?
One of the things that I'm critical about, especially since we're in a pandemic and we're stuck in the house, we're streaming videos and television constantly. All right. But what you watch on television is as important as what you feed yourself. So you're ingesting images and you're ingesting language and you're ingesting these scenes which are impacting your sleep. They're impacting your nervous system. So my thing is, whether it's the news or how you're engaging with some of these networks, your Netflix and all that, you have to determine what best fits your moods, what best fits your appetite. And so, sometimes it's best to decompress in such a way. I can't get to the masseuse right now. All right. But I literally find certain things. I'm watching cartoons. I'm watching the Little Rascals. I won't,
Yes.
I can't watch the news. It's, because I know how it makes me feel. I feel it in my muscles, and so
Mm.
it's made me, even though I'm supposed to exercise a certain amount anyway, it's made me get on this bike. It's made me say, okay, walk around the block a few times, but do not engage where you're sitting on this stuff because there's no way to release it. And so
Yes.
when I deal with popular eugenics, sometimes the messages are hidden and coded in what it is that you're watching. So you watch something and realize, I don't feel well now that I've watched that. Or I've had people tell me, when I
Mm.
watch this, it's angering me, or I feel depressed, or it's like watching a train wreck, but I can't stop watching it. And so the first thing I say is not only unplug the television, but unplug the cable box. You need to get
Yeah.
outside. You need to get off of this. And some of it is also, it's all social media, so
Oh,
you
yes.
find and it's not like you're covering your eyes away from things, but literally you have to protect your own body. And when you don't recognize that, thank you, Dr. LaJoyce, but you taught me things like you have to get water in. So half of us are dehydrated anyway.
No doubt.
You have to get a proper amount of sleep. So if I've watched something at 9 o'clock at night and then tried to go to bed around 11, but it's still pressing on me and I'm having, interrupted sleep, I'm not,
Yes.
I'm having fitful rest, then it's almost as bad as not having rest at all.
That's very true. First of all, I want
Right.
to go to bed at 10.
Yes, ma'am.
Let's be crystal clear. All right. So I thought I didn't hear that. The second thing is I am protecting my eyes
Yes.
because you know what? When I protect my eye gate, I'm protecting my heart.
Yes.
Yes.
And it's important that my heart be protected so that my heart does not break from what I am seeing, because injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. And that is our sympathetic nerve, literally, because we are a sympathetic people and we are an emotional people. And that is what really gets us, because we know it could be our brother. We know it could be our cousin. Oh, no, let me stop. Let me take that back. It's not could be our brother. It's been our brother. It's been our uncle. It's been our husbands. I could tell by the way my husband sits in his chair that he is happy to be home. And the things that he wants to shield me from, because he doesn't want to tell me if he got stopped because he's in his decent car, if he had a situation at work. And so we've got all these things collectively that build and build and build, and we've got to protect our hearts some way. But like you say, we've got to stay in tune. And on the collegiate level, Dr. Shea,
Mhm.
on campuses, how are our children to endure just the barrage of racist things coming their way?
Well, activist James Baldwin always said, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced.
Mm-hmm.
So, one of the things that we work with students on is how do you face these issues in a healthy way? How do you find yourself sitting in a class and experiencing microaggressions? How do you acknowledge what the impact is of these things on you and on your physical health? And then where do you find a safe space on campus to come and process? So we are trying to help students find safe spaces to come and to process. Now, really, at this point in time, the whole campus should be safe for our students. They really should
Yes.
be safe. But what we're finding and witnessing and experiencing right now is that they are not safe spaces for our students. So we're trying to say, listen, self care is important for you as a student. There's a lot of anxiety. You have to worry about grades. You have to worry about what's going on with your families in relation to COVID. You're on campus. You're trying to not catch the virus yourself. You're trying not to bring it home to your family members
Mm-hmm.
who are at higher risk of mortality if they do catch, if they are to get the virus. So we are really trying to promote counseling, mental health counseling on campus, particularly amongst our students of color, and encourage them to take advantage of counseling. encourage them to engage in discussion and dialogue, and
Mm-hmm.
encourage them to be safe when they're out at rallies and protests, because they have to care for their physical health too, and encouraging them to get their sleep as well as drink water. So we are trying to take a multifaceted approach.
Well, I want to get into the rally and the protest aspect when we come back. Don't go away. More on Ask the Good Doctor on one of the pandemics we are enduring, racism. We'll be back after this. Welcome back to Ask the Good Doctor. I'm Dr. LaJoyce Brookshire, joined by my three esteemed colleagues: Dr. Shea Butler, Diversity and Inclusion Chief Officer at a campus upstate New York; Dr. Shantella Sherman, the foremost leading expert in America on eugenics; and Dr. Jonathan Matthias Lassiter, a professor of psychology. And we were just starting to talk about protesting in the streets. And I'm going to tell you, as a professor, I had my students do an exercise. First of all, the City College campus and the City of New York system wanted to strike, but in solidarity with everything that's going on in the nation. But striking is against the law in the state of New York. So we were instructed to do a scholar strike, which included conversations about social injustice and racial inequality. So it was a teaching moment, and it was phenomenal. So I had already built into the curriculum that my students, my speech students, were to give a speech on their personal experience of when they encountered a social injustice. And what these children had to say was amazing. I learned this. I learned that some of our Black, brown, and yellow students who are lighter skinned in every ethnicity imaginable. They say that they use their white privilege to shield the darker skinned ones at the protest. They literally place themselves in front in the line of danger. Can you all believe that? I was shocked to hear that. Doc Shan?
Yes, I believe it, and I'm grateful for it. I'm happy for it. Again, understanding eugenics, I want to explain to you that um,
Please.
when we talk about police and how they determine who is criminal, who fits the description,
Mm.
I can show you documentation as early as 1890 that says a pure Black, meaning a dark-skinned person, is more likely to commit any number of crimes, to be immoral, to be, in search of committing crimes, and to be genetically predisposed to criminality. So things like Black men standing on a street, young Black boys just standing there. All right. Sometimes that's just engaging if you're a white youth. If you're a Black youth and you happen to be dark skinned, it means that you're up to something. And the police
Mm.
have a right to arrest you for loitering, for on some books, especially down south, it's idleness. All right. When did being idle become a crime? When did unemployment become a crime? But these are written on the books. And so it's that hyper surveillance that
Mm-hmm.
you get going into stores. This is something that's taught socially. And so you'll see it in, again, films, and you see it in posters, you see it in media. But this is all a part of the training that's in schools and housing. It's in our education system. It's how we define who is a proper American, who is a threat, who should be surveyed, and who will create problems. And
So is
so,
this why we get followed around in the stores? This
absolutely,
hyper
Exactly.
surveillance. This is
absolutely,
exactly it. This is
absolutely. And
this
you
is
can
also
own the building, and
you
you can own the building. Or the number of times I've walked in a space and had someone say, I've asked you to clean my room, or where you assume I work there. And it's like, no, you're actually here to see me. I'm
yes.
So, but it's visually what you've been told to expect based upon phenotype, based upon how a person appears.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for those of you who are in the Northwest in academia, you remember the studies, the Yale studies, the nude body studies, where years ago every freshman that entered college had to do a nude walkthrough. Um,
Whoa.
yes, and yes, and basically it was to take the measurements of every white freshman that attended Harvard, Yale, Brown, all of your Ivy Leagues. They wanted body measurements of their posture.
Wow.
They wanted to be able to show that your posture was in line with your character and your mentality. And then to pair the male students up with the female students at these other Ivy Leagues in order to have a eugenic surplus of able-bodied, phenotype-fitted Americans. So you can imagine what our Black bodies look like in deference to that. And so that is why we're always, quote unquote, out of place. I'm sorry, I do that every time.
You know, stop. How do we help the children get acclimated? Dr. Jonathan, how do you help your students get acclimated to come to college, your Black and brown and yellow students? How do you do that?
Yeah, one of the ways I do that is by helping them think outside of that box. What you were describing there, Dr. Shannon, A.J. Franklin has a theory called Invisibility Syndrome. And it's when we are only viewed as our race and all other parts of us are invisible. And that can be internalized. We can start to believe that ourselves. And so what I tell my students is, who are you beyond your race? Not putting the race to the side. That's an important framework. But what else are you? Who else are you? What are the things that you want to achieve? And thinking about pursuing that and not only judging ourselves by our race, because everyone else is going to do that. So knowing that that's there, but not limiting ourselves.
Yes, yes. Okay, Dr. Shea?
Well, what Dr. Jonathan just said is so true. I mean, I just think about the work that we're doing by affirming students, focusing on they're building their selves as leaders. So we have several leadership development programs. We have them for first year students of color. We have a multi-tiered mentoring program, because while it is great for me to stand up as an administrator, seasoned in my tenure in higher education, we've learned that sometimes students receive messages better from their peers. So we have a peer mentoring program that focuses on leadership, identity, race, ethnicity, where students can come and have these conversations, talk to students about what the transition to a predominantly white institution is going to be like for them as a person of color. We actually give them the Strengths Quest training program, and we have them take an assessment on what their strengths are, so that they know coming in, especially when we're at a time when there's such a focus on deficit models and want to put labels that are deficit on our students, that they're underprivileged, that they're underprepared, that they shouldn't really be on our campuses. So when they come in, we take an assets-based approach, we take a strengths-based approach, and we call them scholars, and we focus on building leaders, because words matter.
They really do matter, and I think it's important to not cause harm, and to give them a hug when you know you can't hug them, but I hug them, okay? Especially by the end of the class, by the last class, I'm hugging you. But it is important that they know that this is our safe space and that I'm here for you, but I'm not going to take any mess from you. But this starts early, especially in academia. Period. This starts in grade school. This starts in junior high school with the separation in terms of race. True story. I remember a time when I was touring with my Soul Food book tour, and I had gone to Colorado, and I had gone to a school, and I was supposed to speak to the entire student body, but there were only about 40 children there. And then, we spoke, and there was only one child of color. I'll never forget that. And then I turned to the lady who coordinated it, and I was like, why are there only 40 children here? She said, oh, this was such special. We just wanted you to speak to the honor kids. I said, no, you go get those bad kids. I want to talk to all of those bad kids. I want to talk to the ones getting DNFs. All right. I was a bad kid. I got suspended 13 times and got expelled once, right? For fighting. Every time. I never threw the first punch, but I could finish you. Anyway, I'm not really proud about that, but it's the truth. And so I'm like, go get them bad kids. Those are the children I want to speak to. And when they went to get the bad kids, how about it was overwhelmingly Black and brown and 2 white kids? And that's like, aha. I see
Yeah.
what's happening here. And so it starts so early, Doc Shan.
I mean, even the concept of bad is subjective.
Yes.
And so, like I said, the language is written in there. I actually heard a person sitting on a school board call some children feral one day.
Call them what?
Right, feral, right, animals. Okay, basically a bunch of animals. Now, the person didn't know they had a mic on and that the mic was still
Mm.
live, and they were taking a break. But I immediately addressed that. Now, I don't have a child anywhere in
Yeah.
that room, but I immediately went up to this person and gave them all types of hell. And it was just like, okay, the fact that this person looks like us, who said it, told me again, this is when we talk eugenically, you'll have other Black people who are trying to save the race
Ah,
by excluding certain groups, certain of the kids, because they feel like they're a bad representation of the race as a whole. We don't get to make those types of determinations because, again, when you're talking about talking to young people, again, holistic approach means, what is this child going through at home? This child needs my
yes.
help. They need my attention more than they need my scrutiny. And so
Absolutely.
if you're going to be in these professions, you have to understand that bad, ugly, dirty, poor, all of these may be one thing, but they don't mean unintelligent,
That's right.
incapable. And so you're there to teach. And so, we have to be guardians of these kids once more. And parents need to be aware of the type of language that they're, at risk. Any
Okay.
child that's born right now is at risk.
Hello.
Every child is at risk.
Yes.
Every
So
child is. Absolutely.
so we have to get to a point, as Dr. Shea is saying, challenge those words, challenge that language, because linguistics is literally before you're putting labels on folks before you see them, and then when you see them, it justifies, quote unquote, what it is that you're doing to them.
Well, I call myself bad because I was.
But I
And it
mean,
didn't
but that was
it didn't mean that
behavior.
it didn't mean
Right,
not smart. I know what that
right,
means.
right,
I know,
right.
and that woman
Right.
knew what I meant too that day. But what we have an opportunity to do in the higher education or in any educational system is to love on and to educate them, to give them the things that are not being taught and that are not being said. When I went back to my alma mater, Eastern Illinois University, went back to the campus, gather the children who are having a really tough time, and let me talk to them about how to navigate successfully on the campus. And she was like, okay. And when I got to that room, there was not a place to sit. There, I said, oh my goodness, all of you all are having trouble. I could not believe it. But we had a very candid discussion that day. I mean, because I was involved in every single thing. Basically, one of the ways to endure it is to run things. What do you all think?
Yeah.
Exercise your leadership, right?
Yes.
Dr. John?
Yes.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And what you were a possibility model. You were a model for someone that had been there, done that, and
I love
had
that.
come out on the other side. So that's so incredibly important for children. You were talking about starting young, and I think about that's one of the reasons why ethnic and racial socialization is so important, right? So teaching our things about their cultural heritage and history, the Black pioneers and Black inventors and so on and so forth, to instill a sense of pride in them. That is so incredibly important. Also, preparing them for bias. So
Mm.
helping our Black kids understand that, hey, people are not going to judge you fairly. And sometimes it's going to happen just because of the color of your skin.
That's right.
Research has shown that when parents and other primary caregivers
Did we
engage
lose internet?
in ethnic racial socialization with their children, it is related to real positive results. We see higher grades in school, we see higher self-esteem, and we also see lower psychological distress in students as well. So these things are really important, and you're right, it's important to start it young.
It is, because the more we see these shooting deaths of Black men in custody or even while out jogging, and it brings cries of racism. But apparently, we can't even be, let's see, sleeping in our own homes. And apparently, we can't even be bird watching without being subjected to a possibility of racism. How innocent is bird watching? I was just aghast. And how crazy was it that both of their last names were Cooper?
Mhm.
You dig deeply enough, and they're probably related somewhere.
Probably are.
Okay, they probably are. And I think that Black men overall, I just want to take a shift to hear Jonathan, Dr. Jonathan, that Black men are paying the highest cost.
We really are, because we're really in between a rock and a hard place. Because this is having, one, we're targeted more because we're more visible, and then all the gender, racial stereotypes around being a thug, criminality, so on and so forth. Also, when we express emotions, they're policed. So we're experiencing this racism. It's having a mental health impact, and then we're afraid to let that be known. We're afraid to get the help because we have to be strong. That's what's been instilled in so many of us, and oftentimes by our own family members.
Of
I
course.
definitely know that that was the message that I got. I was a very sensitive bookworm child. My dad was like all about toughening me up, right? And so those sorts of messages, though, not only are you dealing with all of these things from the white world because of racism, but then you judge your own
Yes.
reaction to it negatively. And then when we look at the mental health field, there aren't enough Black psychologists and other mental health professionals to even provide services to everyone that needs them. So then
True.
we don't get the help because we don't trust the white therapist. We
No.
don't trust people outside of our community to understand us. How could they when they are the ones that are perpetuating the harm? And if they're not doing it directly, they benefit from the system.
There's something called cultural competence.
Oh, there you go.
And they are not culturally
Yeah.
competent to address our needs.
Mm-hmm.
So, this is why we have an inherent distrust of that system, and it's flawed. It's flawed. And honestly, this is why people will say, "No, me and the Lord are going to handle it," or I saw the deacon at the church," and these are the reasons why. And then your girlfriend, your best girlfriend, now becomes your therapist, or your hairdresser knows for sure. These are all of the reasons why we don't seek the professional help. And honestly, I would like to see a movement that trains every single hairdresser to be a counselor.
We definitely need
Because
it.
okay, because that
Wow.
is because your
Yes.
hairdresser really does know. Okay. And if she's really a good one, she can tell by your hair what your struggles are and what your abuses are, your substance abuses are, because your hair is a
Wow.
telltale signal to what your eating habits are and your substance abuse, if any. Your hair can tell. It's an extension of you. It's growing out of your head. And so this is how then naturopathically, as a clinician, I can tell also what people are enduring. And I'm quick to identify the adrenal exhaustion because when doctors are speed doctoring, going from office to office, doing practicing managed care instead of really getting to the root cause of what's wrong with you, who the person who never even asked you, are you safe at home? Even though they should. And just think of until they started asking that question, so many women went to the doctor where they were one-on-one in a room with a doctor, and then they had an opportunity to tell that they were unsafe, but the question was never asked. So certain questions are never asked. People laugh or are so embarrassed when I ask them how they pee and poop. Nobody, doctors don't ask, do you pee? Unless you go to the doctor complaining of constipation, a doctor may not ask you how many times a day you poop. I do every time. You don't get to walk out of my door before I know how many times you poop, what it looks like, does it sink, does it float, how many times you wipe, and I need to know that. This all helps to put together the story about you, but you can't do it in 15 minutes. So it's woefully negligent. And so this is why everybody needs a naturopathic doctor. Just saying. But it goes along side by side with your traditional doctor. We also need to overcome something in our community called colorism, which has also caused a great deal of harm. And Doc
Yes.
Shan, all that you have done to teach us about colorism.
It'll never stop.
Oh gosh,
It'll
you
never
just think that
stop.
we got over that, but we didn't. We haven't.
No, because it's tied, unfortunately, to um, social currency. Your skin color is your social currency, unfortunately. And so, you'll still have people have babies, and you get an older relative that comes by and checks the back of the baby's ears to try and determine how dark that child is going to end up, as if it matters.
Yes.
And
Like
so,
you'll love it any less. Like you'll
right,
love that baby any less.
right. And so, this is the thing: we've been wearing masks for so long
Hmm.
that we've become not our general beautiful selves that we're showing, but that thing that people want to see, that people need to see, that people aspire to have. And so many folks go home, close the doors, and they're in tears. They're falling apart. They're not coping. And we're not even recognizing that we're not coping and the people around us are not coping because we're so busy with these masks. And so I've been prayerful that as this COVID, we've been locked in and we're forced to kind of see each other on screens, even though we can't touch each other and see each other in person. We can see each other a little better. And so, you're
Yes.
looking at people in the face all of a sudden. I used to always say in some of the worst neighborhoods in the country, if I'm there, go up to some of the young men and just look them in their face and speak,
That's it.
because you tend to sidestep them. You won't give them eye contact. It's not as if you're necessarily afraid of them, but when you don't acknowledge their
That's it.
humanity, you
That's it.
don't acknowledge their humanness, then they start stomping around being any and everything but what they're supposed to be. And so
Amen to that.
their identity formation is based upon how we
Yes.
treat them and acknowledge them. We're not helping the elders. But we're also not helping young people to identify. I need you, young man, to carry these groceries and say, "Gentlemen, how are you today?"
That's right.
Acknowledge them,
That's right.
And
and we're
remind
not
them
doing that.
also to pull up their pants. So
Pull up the
don't go
pants.
away. We'll be back with more on Ask the Good Doctor right after this.
All right, awesome, y'all. That's some good stuff right here. That's some good stuff. Okay.
All
All right.
right.
So last segment will 7 minutes. All righty. And Dr. Butler, I've been picking on you. Come a little bit more in the middle of your camera for me.
Okay.
In the middle. The other way. Come over a little bit more, a little bit more. That's good. That's perfect. You my best friend now. Good. All right. So here we
Yeah.
go. Last segment. Right in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome back to Ask the Good Doctor. I'm Dr. LaJoyce Brookshire, and we are having an amazing conversation on one of the 3 pandemics that we are currently forced to endure, and that is the pandemic of racism, now declared as a public health emergency. It is, yes, indeed, a public health crisis. How in the world can we come to an understanding in our nation? My classmates, my students, they wrote some beautiful things and expressed some amazing things about living in households where their parents were woefully ignorant, living in households talking about how their parents didn't understand, how their parents themselves were racist, even though they were minority. I was shocked to hear some of these things, but these are things that are continuing. And thank God for a setting like a classroom where we have an advantage and an opportunity for them to learn and to grow. What else can we do to help America learn and to grow? Dr. Shea.
Well, one of the things I think about that you just said about the racism that exists within the diaspora, within the community, so much of it is tied to colorism. And there's so much of that is because we just are not aware and that we just don't know our history and we don't even understand the context of what is happening in this country now. And I do think that there's some intra conversations that need to happen, even as we
Yes.
have inter conversations to get at this broader issue. And so I think affinity group conversations, I think, are really an important aspect of what needs to happen as we move forward. I do believe that white folk need to talk to white folk about racism, race and racism
Mhm.
in this country. I do believe that there are conversations that we need to have within the Black community across the diaspora
Yes.
to try to mitigate for some of these stereotypes that we have within our race. When we talk about the Hispanic population, there are recent studies right now that are out that you see there's sort of a 60-40 split with Hispanics leaning towards, in some instances, leaning toward the party that has not served them well. And when you dig deeper, you find that it's usually across lines of color and across lines of class.
Yes.
So I think we just have to start to face where we are and come up with a framework and a model that will help advance dialogue. One of the things that I look at is the model of cultural humility. What I like about the model of cultural humility is that it promotes an understanding of self-awareness as one of the guiding foundations. Then the next step is to bring individuals together to partner as equals. So the problem is a lot of times is that when we come to these conversations, we don't see each other as equals. So that's the next step. And then as you partner together, it's about understanding and breaking down systems.
There you go.
And I definitely think, and then they throw a little truth and reconciliation in there.
That'll work too.
We need to get honest. We need to really get honest about.
Can we say reconciliation and reparation?
Oh,
yeah,
let's
absolutely.
That'll
do
it.
That's
exactly.
right. Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Lassiter.
Yeah, so I always think about our worldview. So these issues are really problems of worldview. Dr. Leonard James Myers talks about the optimal worldview and the sub-optimal worldview. And what we see across the globe is that we're all invested in a sub-optimal worldview that does not serve us. And the white people, it is not serving them either. But they benefit economically, but they suffer psychologically. Dr. Leonard James Myers says that the suboptimal worldview is grounded in individualism, competitiveness, and materialism. And often what we find, even in communities of color and Black communities too, is that we're trying to be whole with whiteness. And it is not working for us. So we have to learn how to find our worth outside of the latest fashions, outside of, rugged individualism. I did this on my own, but connect more with community because that's our roots. That's what's in us. Connect with our elders. That's cross-generational conversations. All of those things are ways that we can heal ourselves, but we have to go back to the source. And that source is in our African values, from those pre-colonial societies. That's what it's about. Connecting with community, connecting with spirit, connecting with each other.
Okay. And as we do that, we may find that as we go back to the elders, that grandmama may have been right or grandmama may have been wrong. Okay. Either way. Doc Shan, take us home.
Learn to love yourselves. And again, if grandma got it right, see, we're fractured now. But grandma, grandpa, great-grandma, great-grandpa were whole. All right. Because they knew at least who they were.
Yes.
And right now, part of the struggle is in taking those masks off and being content and loving yourself so that you can love one another. Treat everyone the way you would want your grandmother or your children treated.
That's right. Okay. And may I encourage you to really, as you embark upon this life and continue to embark upon this life, that every day, if you are faced with something that is brutally an injustice, if you see something, say something. But I want you to swallow it, digest it, and move on. The action is saying something. That's the what are you going to do about it part? What are you going to do about it? That's the say something. Digest it and swallow it and move on. Because if you don't, it sets up a series of anatomical, physiological, and psychological consequences that, if not dealt with, will kill you. And we don't want you dead. We need every single one of you. We need you healed. We need you whole. We need you with us as I throw my fist in the air. So I want to thank everyone joining me today. Your contact information is on the screen. Be in touch with them. Next time, join me on Twitter at Ask the Good Doc, on Instagram and Facebook at Ask the Good Doctor. That does it for me. I'd like to thank my team, Christopher Green, associate producer, and Irvin Wright, supervising producer. Remember to let your eyes shine, cut back on the wine, get good food fast, and go easy on the greasy. I'm Dr. LaJoyce Brookshire, here to help you attain and maintain your perfect health. Let's do it again next week, okay? God bless you.